the short-lived coup that just happened in Russia. Of course, we're in the midst of the Ukraine war, so we got word, this was a few days ago now, that the leader of the Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, I think I'm pronouncing that right,
Yeah, we're not going to pronounce
was,
any Russian names right, guys. Just give us some slack with that, please.
yeah, please. Um, he announced that he was going to withdraw his troops from the front in Ukraine um, as kind of a rebellion against the upper Russian defense minds. He specifically left Putin out of the speeches that he was making, but he wanted to attack specifically um, the defense minister Shoigu and some of the generals like Jerem- Geramisov, I think, or Gerasimov. Again,
Yeah, he
names are
he was
tough.
going against the head of the military more than going against Putin for sure. He was not directly calling for a change in the government system. He was calling for a change in the military leadership, and he was frustrated that so much of the fighting was falling on the Wagner group, especially in Bakhmut. He felt like he wasn't getting the ammunition he needed. He felt like the military operations that Russia was planning were short-sighted.
Mm,
He didn't think that the troops that he was getting to the front were well trained enough and should have even been there. He was saying that the Russian troops that were at the front were so poorly trained that they were a liability to the Wagner troops.
mm.
And he wanted to see just an overhaul of leadership as soon as possible.
Yeah. And of course, he wanted himself to be the new leader, head general, defense minister, whatever it might be. And so, in protest of these conditions, he takes these troops away from Ukraine, brings them back into Russia, takes the Russian military headquarters in the city of Rostov on Don, which is a city of about 1 million people. He claims, and I think there are no accounts against this, that he did it completely bloodlessly, which to me implies that he had Russian soldiers helping him, coming to his aid while he was in the midst of this, um, and then started to make his way with this convoy of soldiers towards Moscow. And it looked like there was a full Russian rebellion in effect.
Honestly, when I was watching it go down, I was like, oh my God, like this is either like amazing news for Ukraine, where so many Russian troops are going to have to be pulled off the front to deal with this, or we're going to see just a total change of Russian military leadership.
Yeah,
And as it went on, I was just waiting until they got to Moscow, and then all of a sudden they stopped, and it was called off. And the time period of, I felt like it was so escalated, it was so intense. And then 20 minutes later, I'm reading that it was over, and the leader of the Wagner group is telling everybody to go home.
yeah,
And it was so confusing because the apparently the negotiations were arbitrated by Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, on
yeah.
Putin's behalf. And Lukashenko made a deal with the leader of the Wagner group, who was leading this armed rebellion, to call it off. And the only thing I was thinking of, okay, well, what did he win? For the leader of the Wagner group to stop going to Moscow when he was only 100 kilometers away, he must have won something fairly significant. And it looks like he kind of got what he was wanting. What was the name of the Russian general that started with an S that you were talking about?
Shoigu?
Shoigu? He's under house arrest, apparently.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Apparently, he's under house arrest. So
Huh.
I think he's no longer going to be leading the Russian military.
Interesting. Okay. I I thought Putin might have threatened it with something based on how quickly this collapsed. And that's pure speculation. I just I couldn't see. It's so hard for me to believe that someone else would believe that Putin would just let him kind of get away with this unscathed. Like
Right.
sure. So the deal ended up being that Prigozhin would be sent to Belarus, and live in exile there. But the idea that he'll be safe there and that he won't eventually be assassinated, that seems so un-Putin.
Right. And I mean, all of his family is still in Russia.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
with all of his family still being there, it does. Putin still has so much over him, you know.
yeah. I don't know. So I'm curious then. So this is kind of what happened. Um, Really quick spike in intensity and then quickly drops off. There there were some people killed because there were Russian aircraft that tried to stop the convoys of the Wagner Group convoys that were moving towards Moscow, and the Wagner Group shot them down. But besides that, it was largely bloodless. So it as far as like manpower, this doesn't have a huge effect on anyone. The Wagner troops returned to their posts after this, so it's not like a massive force taken away from the Russian army either. Um, so I'm curious, like, do you see this having any effects on the war or effects on Putin?
Um, I don't think it has a large effect on the war. Ukraine was pushing for a counteroffensive a couple minutes after the Wagner Group started their drive up to Moscow, and they didn't make fantastic progress during that. And I would have figured that at that moment would have been the most opportune time to make progress. And the fact that they weren't able to make progress in that time makes me believe that this isn't going to be very monumental for their success going into the
Mm,
summer here. As far as Putin, I don't think I think Putin is a little bit weaker coming out of this. I think it now shows a lot of the other oligarchs who might not like Putin that just how easy it is to take him out. The fact that you're able to get that close to Moscow in that little amount of time with that little amount of resistance just kind of shows that the Russian political system is just more volatile than what people thought. One of the real reasons I think this is happening is because there is such a deep political apathy in Russia where people are disillusioned with the form of government completely. They know that their form of government isn't actionable to their wills. They can't malleable to their wills. They can't change it. So they don't really care about politics. And at the end of the day, that was good for Putin for a long time because it meant that people weren't going to revolt against him. But it's also really bad for Putin because it means the people won't protect him. The people are not going to come to his defense when someone comes to overthrow him because
hmm.
people don't really care about who rules them anyway.
Yeah,
So I think that I think at the end of the day, this is bad for Putin. It shows oligarchs that they have more of an opportunity to take the leadership role that Putin currently holds.
yeah.
That's how I view it.
I think I agree with both of those points. Really, a non-factor for the Ukraine war. Unfortunately, we were texting while this was happening and hoping that there would be more of an internal conflict in Russia so that Ukraine could gain a little bit more of an advantage. I don't think that's really the case. Putin comes out a little bit weaker, but also like not really significantly. I think it weakens him because it happened, but it doesn't weaken him too much because of how short-lived it was,
Yeah,
um, and that he was able to get rid of it. I Yeah, I don't know. It's such a weird 36-hour event. I don't know if there's
I
much more
know.
to take from it.
Well, I also think it's important to say like we weren't like rooting for the Wagner Group to take out Putin. I don't think because the Wagner Group has a hell of a lot of problems. I mean, they're further right than Putin. They're explicitly white nationalists, explicitly that way. Um, and them having control of nuclear weapons is way, way, way worse than Putin having control of nuclear weapons. So it was kind of like one of those situations where you're rooting for the chaos for chaos's sake.
Yeah,
You're not really rooting for either side to win it. You're just rooting for the turmoil um, in the enemy's homeland, I guess, from the Ukrainians' perspective, right? Um, I want to mention how this kind of perfectly rhymed with 1905 from my perspective. In 1905 in Russia, they just got out of the Russo-Japanese War, and it was the first war where an Asian power defeated a European power. That's the first time that happened. Um, and the results back home were complete civil revolt. Now, the civil revolt in St. Petersburg back home was a little more ideological. It was a little more socialist in nature. They were pushing for more political reform, but it was still born out of the idea that they were allied into a war, that they weren't doing as well as the state was telling them. And that's exactly what the Wagners and the other Russians who joined the Wagners on this march were protesting against. They were saying, like, you lied to us about the war. You're not giving us the resources to fight the war. You put us in a losing situation and you're embarrassing us. You're embarrassing us on the world stage. You're making Russia look weak. And that's what Russia was going through in 1905 too. Obviously, 1905 led to more significant changes in the form of government than this one did, but I just thought that rhymed really well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that too. That was super interesting to me.